Hello, listeners. Welcome back to Luke's English podcast. How are you doing today? I hope you're doing fine. Here is another episode of my podcast, which is here to help you improve your English by giving you something interesting to listen to on a regular basis, but also by providing you with inspiration, advice, guidance, and general help to help you along your learning English journey. Today on the podcast, I'm talking to a very interesting guest. His name is Ivan Doan, or is that Ivan Doan? We will see. Ivan is an actor and someone who speaks lots of different languages, is a very international person. He's a very interesting guest. This interview happened because Ivan's assistant got in touch with me and suggested that Ivan could be a great guest for my podcast, and that he has plenty of things to say about learning English, working in English, and things like improving your accent and pronunciation. And I thought to myself, okay, that sounds good. I'm always up for speaking to new guests. Ivan is an actor. I had a quick look at his IMDb page. That's the International Movie Database. He has a page there. And it's the brief description of Ivan is that he is an extremely versatile actor, born in Kiev, Ukraine, to a Vietnamese father and a Ukrainian mother. He trained at the National University of Theatre, Film and Television in Kiev. Ivan is a multilingual actor speaking 6 languages. Can you guess what those languages might be? Considering he is that his father is Vietnamese, mother Ukrainian, and he's on this podcast, so that accounts for at least 3 of those languages. What could the other languages be? I'll let you guess. So he's a multilingual actor who performs in different languages, and he's been practicing martial arts since a very young age, and he's a singer. So definitely some very interesting things to explore, and I particularly wanted to ask him about his international background and his cross-cultural experiences, particularly in the world of acting and casting for film and television. His 6 languages, which languages does he speak? How did he learn them? Especially English, of course. How did he learn that to a high level, a level good enough to be able to act in English? Does he have any specific insights for you, my listeners? Is Ivan a special case, or is his approach transferable to anyone hoping to achieve similar results? So is Ivan just one of these lucky people who just happens to be talented at learning languages, or is it something to do with a specific approach that he's taken to this? How does he deal with accents, learning different accents in English for different roles? And how has his approach as an actor helped him with all of this, especially with accents? And if we can learn anything from his example, which you can then apply to your learning in terms of like working on your pronunciation as well as everything else in English. There's also the martial arts side of things, which is interesting to me. I've always been curious about martial arts and read about it and just generally been curious about it, but I never actually did it. I've never actually done it, probably because I just don't really want to get punched in the face, right? Or kicked, or thrown, or choked, or any of those things. And if you're a martial arts master, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, Luke, that's exactly why you need to do Kung Fu, to control your fears and to defend yourself. And I think to myself, well, can't I defend myself with English teaching skills? Can I not just do that? Like, if someone tries to attack me, I can just talk really quickly at them in English to confuse them. Or maybe I can just explain grammar rules at them until they just give up. Like, the present perfect continuous is when you're talking about an action, which, hold on a second, it's an action which started in the past and may or may not continue in the present, but depending on the length of the action. And then they're just like, oh, you know what, never mind. That's my version of Kung Fu. Anyway, I'd never spoken to Ivan before. I had this conversation with him this morning, so I wasn't completely sure what to expect, but I had the interview earlier, and I'm happy to say that the resulting conversation was great. Ivan was a very chatty guy, a great guest. He was able to talk to me about all the things I was hoping for, and I'm very glad to present this conversation for you here today for your listening pleasure. As you listen to this, I suggest that you do these things. First of all, try to note any particular approaches or methods that Ivan has applied to his work and studies and learning of English, which you could apply to. What can you take away from this conversation in terms of insights into learning English that can help you? Also, you could consider Ivan's general mindset and the way he thinks about both acting and language learning, and decide if this provides us with a good example for learning English and how. And obviously, just enjoy this chat with another interesting person on the podcast, living internationally, being an actor, learning languages, working on accents, and how the mindset of an actor can combine with the mindset of a learner of English. There's a PDF available for this. You'll find the link in the episode description. There you will find a full transcript for this episode, including all the things I'm going to say at the end of this conversation. So stick around, because right at the end, I'll come back and I'll speak to you again, and I'm going to list specific insights into learning English which we can take from this episode. So listen until the very end to hear me wrap this all up in a very nice, neat little bow by getting straight to the point about what you can learn from Ivan about learning English effectively. And I have about 11 different points to go through, and I'll do that at the end. But now, without any further ado, let's get into this. Let's start this conversation with Ivan Doan, the multilingual actor. And here we go. Ivan, or is it Ivan? How do I say your name?
That is a good question. I mean, everybody pronounces it differently. It depends like what your native language is. I think most native English speakers would pronounce it as Ivan. My mother would pronounce it as Ivan, as a Ukrainian speaker, And in France, I think you're in Paris, right?
Yes.
So they would pronounce my name as like something like Ivan, So it's different. But I think the original name is Ivan. But you can do it Ivan if that's more comfortable.
Ivan is definitely the way that the name is pronounced in the UK. Yeah. So you've got a very interesting background. Can you just tell me about it? Sort of, your origins, your background. Can you tell me about that?
Sure. So I was born in Kyiv, Ukraine, but my father is Vietnamese and my mother is Ukrainian. So I'm a mix. And that's where I grew up, went to school, and also studied acting. Went to a drama academy. So that would be my background. And I work as an actor, as you probably know.
Yeah. So that's an interesting combination, Ukrainian and Vietnamese.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose that, do you feel like a very international person? Has that affected your worldview at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say so. I never felt like that this particular place is my home. So I feel at home. I travel a lot, and I feel at home in many places, like in Asia and in Europe, and even in the States. Because in the States it's just a country of immigrants. So everybody's from somewhere, someplace. So I just was recently in San Francisco, and I kind of just like the vibe that everybody speaks with some kind of an accent. There's like maybe 40% of people I know with some kind of Asian accent, and nobody cares. It's just like normal,
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would probably consider myself like a citizen of the world, something like this.
Did you spend a lot of time in Vietnam growing up?
I didn't really grow up in Vietnam, but we went pretty often. I think actually the first time we went was I was born before the Soviet Union collapsed. I don't remember anything about the Soviet Union. I was like super little, but we actually went there, I think, in 1989. That was the first time, when I was maybe 2 or 3.
Right.
And then like in the 90s, several times in 2000. So I mean, I remember even how the country changed. Every time you come, it's a bit different. But I didn't really grow up there. I grew up in Kyiv, as I said.
But you've lived in lots of different places as well, right?
Yeah.
And you live in Germany these days. Is that right? Is that basically your home?
I'm based in Berlin at the moment. Yes. This is like my base where I come back all the time. But I just, for work and also for myself, I travel a lot.
Where else have you lived in the past?
As I said, Ukraine, even before the whole thing with Russia began, like before 2014, I even worked in Moscow for some time because I speak Russian as well. So like in Ukraine, people usually speak both. At least if they speak native Ukrainian, they will speak fluent Russian. Which is, I mean, it's not the other way around. And the Russians don't speak Ukrainian and understand maybe about, I don't know, like 40%, something like this.
Are they sort of radically different languages, or not?
Well, it's the same. They come from the same origin in a way, but Ukrainian was developed earlier, and it's in a way it has a more complex grammar, and it is different. It is different. I mean, if you speak Ukrainian, actually, you will understand a lot of Polish, let's say, a lot like some Serbian, like those
Mhm.
Slavic languages, Czech. But if you speak Russian, then that probably won't happen. You know.
I see.
So they
Yes.
are related, but they are quite different. They are
Hmm.
quite different.
Hmm.
There's usually, interesting enough, there's usually more words in Ukrainian to describe like a similar emotion or feeling. Like a simple example would be there's only one word for love in Russian, but there's like at least I can think of two. In Ukrainian, one would just describe love as a general feeling, like I love my dog, I love my country, and the other one would be like specific romantic love. There's a different
Yes.
word, but in Russian they would use the same word.
Okay.
Yeah, so Moscow was for some time. I worked on stage, and Paris for some time. I have some relatives in Paris too, like my Vietnamese side. There's some like cousins I have there and aunts. So I know the city quite well.
Yeah.
You
Really.
know,
Yeah.
yes.
That's nice.
So like that. I mean, sometime in Poland and other countries is just like I mean, UK I would visit also for work. You know, but lived probably like I would say for the longest period that would be Ukraine as a base, and now Berlin as a base.
Okay. And so you work as an actor. Um,
Yeah.
has your sort of multicultural experience, has that contributed to your work as an actor? How is that involved in your acting?
Yeah, absolutely. Like in my case, definitely. Because acting is general. I mean, as an art, it's one thing, and as a business, it's a different thing. I mean, everybody watches shows, and you see that many roles are very ethnically defined.
Hmm.
So usually, if you have a very particular ethnicity, that's how they usually see you. And it kind of repeats. But in my case, it's a bit different. Because I'm ethnically ambiguous. I'm a bit like weird. So uh, so in my case, it's a bit different, and I have played like characters from different countries, like from I also speak French, so it's like from French people, to U.S. Americans, like Russians. It depends. Interestingly, like this is a good question. Because interestingly enough, in different countries, they would look at me and they would have a different opinion of where I could be from. You
Mm.
know, that's
Mm.
that's so interesting. So it shows that every country is kind of like sort of conditioned to see things in a certain way. Like in
Yeah.
Ukraine and Russia, they would definitely see. I mean, Russia particularly, they would look at me and think, oh, maybe Kazakhstan. You know,
Yeah.
and if I'm in India, they would think I'm European. Like, well, he's, yeah. They would say something like, "You're Russian, yes, you're Russian. Russian, you look Russian."
Right.
I said no.
And if you're in sort of like Vietnam or that part of Asia.
They would not identify me as well. I mean, they wouldn't see if I suddenly start speaking Vietnamese in Vietnam, or even actually in Berlin. There's so many Vietnamese people, because they came like in the 80s, to work, and many of them remained. So if I suddenly start speaking Vietnamese, I mean, they like, huh? They don't recognize that the guy actually is half Vietnamese. They don't see it. But I think I've seen that with other people who are mixes. Like I have some friends who are like half German, half Japanese. They also don't really identify that.
Right. So then, as an actor, do you tend to get casted in particular roles?
That's the thing. Not really. Not really. I mean, there's no one kind of type of role that I would be cast. In because of of the way I look, I think, and also maybe also because of the skill set and languages, and like things like martial arts that I also do. There's a bigger variety, of things that how people can see me. Yes, like
Right.
ethnically, I'm really not. I think mostly to casting directors, I am not ethnically defined. They can't say like, oh, he clearly looks like this. And I speak constantly with different casting people, and some of them, like in the States, I'm saying, well, you can be Italian, like
So
you know.
that's an advantage then, isn't it? Right, that you can kind of fit into various boxes and stuff like that.
Well, I
Right.
think so. I mean, for me, yes. Maybe it's a bit difficult to get acting jobs when you are very clearly ethnically defined. What they call like it's actually a negative word, typecasting. But there's
Mm.
this old Hollywood kind of saying, typecasting is casting.
Oh yeah.
which means like you get to you work. You actually do something.
Yeah, you mean
So which is
if
good.
you fit a very clearly defined sort of role, then they know how to cast you, and
Exactly.
it's just like, well, just
Yes.
get this guy because that's this mold that we're looking for, this archetype. Yeah,
Yes.
okay, so
And
it
they
can
and
be an
they and they
advantage.
already Yes, and they have seen you already, doing that, so they know what to expect in a way, But with me, it's just not my karma, it's not my thing. So I have to work with what I have, Even in Ukraine, like when I was living there and I was like studying acting, still to them I looked really Asian, I didn't look like Ukrainian, So they
Yeah,
might not like if they met me on the street, they probably wouldn't think right away. Oh, maybe he just looks foreign. He doesn't look like somebody who knows the language. Although I speak the
mm,
language, of course.
mm. I'd like to get into the languages, and your learning of different languages. So you speak how many? Six languages? Is that right?
6+, I would say, because I constantly improving. I constantly learn. Like for example, last year I did a show in India, so on the way I kind of got some Hindi, here and there, and also because they knew about my multilingual skills, so they even asked me to play some lines in Hindi, and then when they saw that I can actually do it fast, that they started throwing more lines, like
Right,
and say, so
right.
come and say this, it means that, I say, okay, let's do it, So you just learn because if you have this memory, like when you can quickly memorize how things sound, and plus if you have a native speaker who can pronounce it the way it's supposed to be pronounced, so I can very quickly kind of pick that up and sort of it will look like I actually speak the language, when I do that.
This is
So
very
yes,
interesting. So you
yeah.
have a sort of aptitude for picking up languages, then.
Yes, languages and pronunciations, accents. I can even tell you how I noticed it. First it was
Mm.
so I studied in Kiev. Then right away I got invited to work in Moscow, and I flew there. I spent like maybe 2 months there. And the accent in Moscow is different. You
Mm.
clearly know when it's somebody who's from Moscow by the accent, almost like if it's London, people would hear, like people over UK would know it's somebody from London, So
This is in Russian, is it?
yes, we speak like in Russian, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then maybe 2 months later, I came back like to visit my family in Kiev, and they said like, "Huh, what's wrong with you? You sound different. You sound like you grew up there, or something." So it just changed like without even me noticing that, like it's just sort of the ear sort of had adapted, to how it sounds, So I know it's okay. I have this kind of funny thing, and then I started exploring it, and uh, I saw that I can quickly pick up languages and the way people talk.
So six languages. I'm guessing you've got Ukrainian,
Yeah.
Russian, Vietnamese. You live in Germany, so German. You mentioned French, so that's five, and then of course English.
English, yes.
Right, so that's your six languages. And so, when did you learn them? Which ones did you learn in childhood, and which ones have you learned later? I mean, have you learned any of those languages as an adult?
Yeah, of course, all of them. I mean, English was always like at school, but it was pretty much basic English. I mean, anybody who studies English at school in any of those post-Soviet countries doesn't really speak English.
Mm,
It's like pretty basic. I mean, I'm sure you've had many students from that part of the world. So
yeah.
you know what the issues are because the English structure and grammar is quite different from Slavic languages.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, most of them, like consciously, I would say when I was already like in my maybe early to mid 20s, something like this.
Okay. All right. So how did you do it? Should we talk about English? What's
Yeah,
your
sure.
what's your story with English then?
Again, it was motivated by acting. So I was for some time in Moscow. I didn't really like it. So and it was we're speaking like the end of 2000s.
Mhm.
So I thought, okay, I'm more interested in the Western direction. So you got to do something in English. I started doing some things in English, like producing. At that time, was this web series format was super popular. So I got some people like Americans, some Brits who were living in Kiev, and we started doing some small episodes, in English, and that was one thing. Communication, I would say, within that environment really made me learn it, like progress super fast. And apart from that, of course, conscious listening and looking for situations where you have to be in that environment. I would say like this is more like my method. I'm not so much into theory, into kind of like reading grammar books. I mean, I can look at
Mhm.
how what the grammar is, but I don't feel this is like my method. I feel
Mhm.
it's my method is more natural, organic, kind of like how children learn.
Mhm.
Children don't really read grammar, and the funny thing is, I can tell you another story. Like at that time, I
Mhm.
was like to learn. I was communicating with people who speak English, and some of them were Mormons, who go around the world, and in Ukraine, what they were doing, they were teaching English.
International Mormons.
Yeah, the church. Well, I
International
mean,
English teaching Mormons. That's
exactly,
interesting. I
exactly.
didn't know that was a thing. And are they
Yeah, I
trying
don't
to
know if
convert you to Mormonism as well in the
that's the point.
process?
That's yes,
Yeah.
that's the thing. I mean, it's difficult to convert me into anything. So I'm just I have my own thing.
Yeah.
But I got really. I mean, I had really a couple of really nice buddies there. And at some point, uh, some of them started calling me. Like, and they would call and say, "Hey, Ivan, I have this guy here, like, and he's asking me like, what is present perfect?"
Oh no. Oh God, really?
I say like, "What, you don't know?" I'm like, "No, I have no idea, man. Like, what
Oh
present
geez.
perfect? I have all that. Oh,
Yeah.
that's present perfect." So I mean, native speakers have no idea, like how
Mm,
how it actually is. What what
mm,
what it is linguistically speaking. In German, it's the same thing. Like because learning German, when people learn German, it's more complex than English in terms of like all these cases and then genders. In English, no genders. So people are really they get crazy learning German. And Germans cannot help. Germans, they just know it sounds right, it sounds wrong.
yeah.
So if
Yeah.
you ask them like, what is it, the dative case here, or accusative case, or genitive case, they have, ja, keine Ahnung, Dativ, Akkusativ, keine Ahnung, ja. Sag das einfach, I just say it so.
But this is very interesting because this does tell us about how people learn their languages, right? That you learn it from the top down rather than from the bottom up. Except that
Exactly.
when you're an adult and you approach the task of learning a language, it can be difficult and mysterious to try and learn it in the same way that native speakers learn their language, and you have to try and find other routes and other ways. And a lot of the time, you do have to kind of like uh, look at the rules and sort of like break it down in other ways in order to try and get to it. But often that's very unnatural. I mean, yesterday in my classroom, I was teaching my students about telling anecdotes, telling stories, and what came up was some stuff about using past perfect and past perfect continuous and past simple, all these things, and basically, I mean, it became so unnatural. I've been through this so many times where you get into the thing about, well, past perfect is you're describing events that happened before the main events that you're talking about. So here's the main things, and then these things happen just before, but it comes after in the sentence, and it very quickly becomes very abstract and completely unnatural. And we ended up having that conversation where I was saying, "Are you okay? Is everyone all right?" Because that's the effect that teaching grammar often has on my students, is that
Hmm.
I feel like, I don't know, I feel like I punched them all in the stomach or something. I'm like, are you all right? Is everyone okay? And one person said, this seems very unnatural, and I had to agree. I was like, yeah, of course it is. It is unnatural, but it's just one of the things that it's just like one of the ways you had to do it. It's difficult to learn it naturally, so you kind of have to you end up having to kind of break it down. Um, but anyway, but you, certainly, like, it's very important to do things and be active in the language that you're learning, and through that process, you can sort of, acquire it, pick it up, and develop your skills through practice. It seems to be what you were doing. Your English was quite basic then, I suppose, or sort of intermediate or upper intermediate at the time
Yeah,
you started doing this.
I would say intermediate. I would say
Yeah. Okay.
intermediate. Yeah.
Yeah. And through interacting, and you had these lessons with these Mormons. Um,
Well, I mean, those are funny lessons in a way. So eventually, they just invite you to their church, and they just show a couple of like phrases, and they say, "Oh, that's British slang, that's American slang." So they wouldn't explain the grammar because you see, they had no idea like what the grammar actually is. And they would say like. They would write a phrase, and usually there's two of them. There's like two guys. They never go alone. There's two guys, and they would write a phrase, something like "Give me the skinny." Like they said that's British slang, and there's like "Give me the skinny." I think it was something like this. Like
yeah.
and the other one said, Are you sure that's British?" He's like, "I think it's British."
And you're sitting there just having a good laugh over this.
Exactly,
I suppose. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, no, so it was not really like English. It was just their thing, But just listening how they, because I mean, I think one of the most important qualities of an actor is listening and observation. That's how you learn.
Yeah.
So to me, it's just observing how these guys communicate. So if I wanted to learn to play a Mormon, for example, I would just like sit and look at those guys, like what kind of words they choose, how they look at each other, So to me, it's part of this process. How this works for me, as I say, like this how I my language level goes up, just by observing people, and then when I start communicating, then I try to maybe use it,
It's very interesting because I was just reading yesterday. A lot of things happened yesterday, apparently. But yesterday I was reading about the way that the brain processes language, and some research that helps us to understand how we learn English and other languages, and that we do it best when we're involved in what's called multimodal communication. So that means, for example, learning English not just through, let's say, grammar rules, which everyone knows, but also combining it with all sorts of other things, like observing body language and different forms of learning through doing, learning through including the way you move, listening, reading, all sorts of things. So it's interesting that you were kind of observing these guys and the way that they were interacting, and their body language, and probably their tone of voice, their facial expressions and things. All of it together means that your brain sort of makes all these different connections, because it's all one thing, really. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. Yeah. Did they ever did they try to convert you though to Mormonism at some point? At what point were they like, right, okay, we've given you enough English, now you have to, let's start talking about the church?
I mean, they talk about the church all the time, but they show some movies, that kind of thing, like they're not really extremely aggressive, I think, but they would show movies, speak about what's the book? The Book of Mormon, was it? John Smith, the prophet. They would just speak about it. They just talk about it, but it's never really too aggressive, in my opinion. As I said, because maybe it's also because of my background, because of this multicultural cultural kind of a thing, and seeing different cultures, traditions, religions, and all that stuff, so I can in a way compare and be somewhere in the middle, just look at that. Okay, that works for those people. This works for these people, just like with language learning. I think there's people who learn in different ways, but what we actually said about all these different components, that works for me. I think a language is not just grammar, just this, just that, and I can give you a very good example of like this cultural difference. For example, if you remember, you were saying, I just remembered this. There was a show maybe like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, called Chernobyl.
Oh yeah,
I think it was a British. So about the Chernobyl,
great program. Yes, about a sort of dramatization of the Chernobyl disaster.
Exactly.
Yeah, really good.
So it was a really good show. But because I speak Russian, they all play kind of Russians or Ukrainians. You know,
Mm.
Ukrainians are Soviet people. I mean, but mostly those are like British actors.
Yeah,
You
right.
know,
Yeah,
so and I watch it because I know the language. I know how people actually communicate. I know the body language. I know the expression. You know, so I see. I mean, they all do great. I mean, the accents are good and everything, but it's just like something in their eyes, in how they maybe it shows me they're actually British. They're not
yeah.
Soviet. You
And
know.
also, they're doing it that because in these sorts of situations where, let's say, there's a movie or a TV show about people in a different country where they speak a different language, in this case in Ukraine, there's if it's a English language production, they have to make a decision. Do they try to do some sort of like Ukrainian accent in English, or do they just use their normal accents? And also in the casting, I suppose they have to try and choose actors that maybe have, and what accent do they choose? And in Chernobyl, they all spoke with these sort of like, a lot of them had these kind of northern English accents,
Mhm.
and it was an interesting thing because they managed to map these, because sort of like English archetypes, kind of like guys who would work in a nuclear power station in
Mhm.
England, sort of middle managers from the north of England or something. And that was like the closest thing they could get to something. But obviously, yeah, they ended up with the sort of English vibe. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's only people who are from Ukraine and know the vibe will see the difference, you know. But
Mm.
I think people in the UK might not notice that. Just like actually, if we speak about accents, I would like if you watch a Hollywood film and you hear somebody, like they need to speak with a Russian accent, let's say. I mean,
Hmm.
I would say 95% of the time it's not exactly the Russian accent which is real, you know. It's a
Yeah.
Hollywood vision of the accent, but the majority of Americans, and I would even think even Brits and like people who are from English speaking countries, they probably won't notice that it's actually not authentic, you know.
No.
You have to really know. You have to know, you know, to maybe you have to go there, you know, to hear. And you would just see it's just a bit different, you know.
Yes. Yes.
So
Okay. So
perception plays a huge role here as well.
absolutely. Yeah. So you basically started kind of working in English and doing these projects and things, as well as, talking to these Mormons and so on. And so then, where did that take you next? I mean, did you then go to the States or go to the UK, or did was it through your acting work that really your English, it
Yeah.
forced your English to
Yes. Like
improve?
I started getting some projects like English language projects essentially. You know, some American, some UK, some European, where they would need it in English. And yeah, that I think that way I progressed further. You know, so
What,
through. Mhm.
so I was going to say, uh, these projects, were they like 100% scripted? So were you kind of dealing with a pre-written script, which you then had to kind of learn and remember, or was there a lot of improvisation, spontaneity?
Mostly scripted, but it's always like if like in a real movie set situation, any script can be changed quickly. You know, because one thing it's on the page, it's one thing, and then you're in an actual situation, you see that some things are not the way you thought they would be. You know, and then you have to adapt. You know, yes.
Yeah.
So it is scripted, but it can get changed super quickly. You
So you
know,
need sort of skills beyond language skills beyond what's written in the script. I'm just sort of wondering
absolutely.
if like working to be able to deliver the script was a potential way that you leveled up your English. Um, but I suppose it's all part of the
I think so,
process.
and also not only the work itself, but auditions. I mean, I think most actors today have a pretty good memory, you know, because most of like 90% of the time you just do auditions. So it
Hmm.
means, and also today, if before COVID as well, but like during COVID and after COVID is like 95% of the time or 99% of the time, it's self tapes. So you just record like yourself and just send it. You know, that's it. You
Yeah,
don't go there, you know?
yeah,
So, and usually the deadline is really short, like 2 days, you know, sometimes 3 days. If it's a huge scene, they can give you several days, but it's like one scene. Sometimes you have 24 hours, you know, so sometimes it's super fast. So you have to, your memory should be super active. You don't have a lot of time. So I think that also helped to learn faster, because you have to learn. You just have to memorize a lot of text very
Yeah.
fast.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. And it's interesting that there are several crossovers
Yeah.
between sort of like working as an actor and learning a language. And they're quite complementary things, as you said. You've got to have this really good, active working memory to be able
Mhm.
to recall sort of strands, chunks of language. And then there's the multimodal aspect of not just remembering words and grammar, but being able to deliver those things. And that includes all those other things we talked about before, like there's the pronunciation, and then there's the naturalness and all that stuff. In a way, like language learners potentially could sort of imagine that they're actors in order to
Absolutely.
improve their language skills.
I think because in acting, the most important thing is emotion. Of course, it's not. I mean, anybody can read lines, but it's about authenticity. It's about understanding this human being in this particular situation. So those lines that you learn and say, they are related to emotions.
Yeah, and
So
this
that.
again makes me think of my English lessons, where I'll do something about pronunciation, and I like to work with sentences or even
Mhm.
texts, and I'm encouraging my learners to know when they should be going up, when they should be going down, where the pauses are, where the emphasis is, the rise and fall of the voice, and all those things. And it gets to the point where I'm working with a room and I'm trying to encourage them essentially to put some feeling and emotion into what they're saying, and it becomes like a little acting workshop. So yeah, that's interesting, the crossover between the two things.
I think it's great. I think it's a great approach, and I think what I actually saw back in Kyiv and post-Soviet countries, the way they would teach English was very theoretical. So
Yeah,
people would read a lot, they would do exercises, but then they actually need to speak. They just have a hard time doing it. They might understand a lot, still an issue with that, because if you learn from a teacher whose accent is like local, like let's say Ukrainian accent, and then you have to hear like people from the UK. I mean, from London it could be still okay, but if it's somebody from Scotland, or from, I don't know, maybe Liverpool, you're not used to that accent, so it's difficult for them. It's difficult.
absolutely. Yeah. Okay. And so, yeah, then did you got work in the States or the UK? What was your first sort of international acting role in an English speaking country, or your
It
first
was actually,
experience?
it was actually in Kiev. It was in Kiev
Mm,
because many Western productions actually shot. They would shoot in Kiev in Ukraine back then. I mean, before 2014, more like before the Russians took the Crimea. Because
mm,
Crimea was a pretty popular spot for filmmaking, because
mm.
nature is so great and the ocean and everything. Yeah, so it was actually back then. It was even still in Ukraine, and then some stuff in Europe. I haven't actually shot in the US. I worked for US productions, but many of them are shot in Europe. So
Yeah.
for financial reasons, it's
Yes.
kind of cheaper. But now I don't
Yeah.
know what's going to happen. The U.S. president, he has mentioned that he thinks about also putting high taxes on anything which is shot abroad. So he hasn't done it yet, but I don't know. I don't
Who
know. I hope.
knows? Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? So, in terms of your successes, then, what kind of experiences, or I mean, you said you don't really use methodology, theory as much, or certainly don't sort of like study grammar and things like that. But have you noticed any particular methods or approaches or experiences that you've had that have really helped you, like noticeably helped you improve your language skills in English?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, listening for sure. If you listen to the same, like today in this age of podcasts, I think it's super useful because you can listen to the same thing several times.
Mm,
If you didn't understand something, you can look up the words and then listen to that stuff again. I would do that. I mean, I did that with German, let's say. And I would also identify which words they tend to use several times, which means like this word keeps popping up. I don't know what that means. In German is a particular case. They throw in words that actually don't mean anything. And they just like to throw them in.
yeah.
So like, why do they keep throwing that word in? And then you look at, okay, that means that. Okay. And then you understand why it's actually there, So I would say listening and repetition. I would also make lists of words that I want to learn, especially if it's some more complex vocabulary, more technical maybe in some situations. Or like for filmmaking, you do have to learn like particular filmmaking vocabulary if you want to work in an English speaking country or with English speaking teams, because filmmaking vocabulary is always different. It's not normal language. You
Yeah,
kind of have to, you need to know those professional terms that they use on the set, to be able
right.
to communicate quickly, understand what they want from you, you know.
Yeah, of course. So that's quite a high pressure situation because everyone's time is precious. So you have to react pretty fast, and if they're shouting out sort of like orders at you or something, and it's a lot of jargon, I suppose, that you have to kind of
Yes, that's
deal with.
exactly what I meant. Yes, exactly the jargon, those particular words that people use. I mean, some people like most people know like some basic words like action and cut. But not everybody uses that.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
in Germany, for example, they don't use action. They don't even use the German word for that. They just say bitte, which means like please,
Please, please. That's interesting.
or like und bitte. And
Really?
please.
Yeah, in English, action,
Yeah.
which sounds pretty awesome, doesn't it? Although you can say that in lots of different ways. Apparently, Clint
Yeah.
Eastwood. What does Clint Eastwood say? Oh, I can't remember now. Oh,
When
he
you're ready.
says, "Yeah, that's it. When you're ready."
That's great.
Yeah,
That's a good approach. Yeah.
that's nice.
That's a really
Um,
good approach.
okay, so well, I guess I mean I'm just thinking about you and comparing you to other learners that I've met, and thinking about my listeners and just thinking to them, thinking, what are they thinking at this point? Are they thinking, well, Ivan, he's a special case. He's just one of these lucky people who's able to pick stuff up. Is that the situation you think, or
Well,
are
I,
you
I
just like
get, I
everyone
get,
else?
I get this response from people sometimes, but I always say like, well, it's not that I don't have to do anything. I mean, you do have to have a lot of discipline. I mean, if you're an actor, you definitely have to have a lot of discipline, more discipline than in most jobs. I think Adam Driver actually said that he wanted to be in the military.
Hmm.
He wanted actually to go to Iraq, but I think
He
he had.
wanted to go to
He
Iraq.
wanted it. Yeah, he wanted. He had damaged something. I think either his hip or something. I don't remember. He broke a leg, so he could, you know. And then he went to study in Juilliard, his acting school in New York.
Hmm. Hmm.
And what he noticed that he said was interesting enough. Acting is not so different from the military because like discipline plays a huge role. I mean, if you're not disciplined, it just doesn't. It's not. It's impossible.
Yeah.
It's the first thing you have to be super. So I mean, it's similar with languages. I mean, discipline comes into play. To me, it's a little bit. I would say not only because the ability, but also because of my background, like in martial arts, which also all about discipline. I started when I was like 7. I still like work out every day.
Yeah.
So it is also part of that. So just you have to do it again and do it again and come back to that. And I think I still haven't mastered that thing. I still haven't understood this expression, and it keeps popping up, so it bothers me that I don't understand it. So you have to have the discipline to go back and look at it again or listen to that again. I always say like people have different abilities, but even if it's somebody who is not super talented, let's say, but he has super high discipline, he might progress even faster and go even further than somebody who is talented but is sort of like wasting his time and doesn't really focus that much. I've seen those cases, like
Yeah.
actors are actually a good example. Acting is a good example for those kind of people. You see many people who are super successful who might not be the most talented people in the world, but they're so focused, they're just extremely focused. In music, you see that a lot, who are maybe not the best singers, but they're just like, I mean, something like, if I think of Lady Gaga, I think she just works like a horse, like she's just super active,
Yeah.
Although there
Yeah.
might be singers too, like who can do it easier, like Aretha Franklin or something, who's just like, who seems like she just opens her mouth and it's so easy, it's so easy. Maybe she doesn't have to work that much, but discipline.
Yes. I mean, Absolutely. And so when we talk about discipline, we're talking about being willing to keep doing something, even when it's difficult, even when it's not pleasing, persevering, keeping going, and having sort of high standards for yourself. Yeah, I mean, sure, that totally makes sense. And being willing to put the time in and to keep going, coming back to it, and yeah, and basically kind of like being stubborn as well,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
I think is a lot of it. And I can relate that to people I know who've learnt languages effectively, that they just kind of they're bothered by the fact that they haven't got it quite right yet, and they just go back in and just keep persevering. And
I
same
think you
same is
just have
true.
to. Yeah, you have to find what motivates you. You know, like your personal motivation, and just stick with that. You know, like if it's this anger that motivates you, stick with that. You know, but also set realistic goals. I think like if realistic goals are better than unrealistic goals. You know, like you set like a timeline, and it's like I want to reach that level. You know, I don't want to be. It's not perfection, but it's something very concrete and specific. You know, that's I mean, this is in a way my approach in many things. You know, like because sport and martial arts they are very clear. I like to bring this example because it's so obvious, like this famous kiss formula, keep it simple stupid, you know, like so it's like that. Martial arts is so simple, you know. I need to learn this form or this stance, you know, and then you give yourself 2 weeks to do that, you know. And then this complex form, 2 weeks unrealistic, you need 6 months, you know.
Yeah. What kind of goals have you set for yourself in terms of your English or other languages?
In English, I would usually like when I was learning it, the goal was first having like a normal everyday conversation, you know, and then when I got that, you know, like having a more advanced conversation, you know, and when I have had that, it's like improvisation, just like no need to think and to prepare, you know. Like at this
Mm.
point, of course, I mean, in English and other languages, you can give me a script or you can tell me what the scene is about. I'll just improvise it, you know, just like I can do it in other languages, you know. But if that was the first goal, you know, in the beginning, that would not have been possible, you know. So you have to have realistic goals, you know,
Yeah.
and step by step, step by
Mm.
step.
What about accents? And I'm talking about accents in English then,
Hmm.
because obviously this is a very big thing for an actor, that you have to be able to adapt your English accent for different roles. For my listeners or my learners of English, obviously their concern is trying to perhaps lose the influence from their first language on their accent in English, or at least trying to be as clear as possible and as natural sounding as possible. But for an actor, it goes even further than that, because you also have to seem to be you have to be authentic. You have to pass yourself off as being American or English or from a particular part of the States or a particular part of the UK or something. So what's your approach to kind of dealing with accents in English?
I would always, I mean, authenticity is key, of course. And if I know where the guy's from that I'm supposed to play, I would typically identify a couple of people, you know, who are from that place. And I would listen to recordings. If possible, I would communicate if possible. Not always
Mm,
possible, you know,
mm,
but at least recordings. I could give like a tip to those who want to improve their accent. Like another useful tip I find is that it's good to identify somebody who is somewhere like of the same, more or less the same age that you are and the same gender, like somebody who could kind of represent you in that place, you know, in a way,
mm,
because you're close to that, you know. So that would be easier than like, for example, I want to learn, I don't know, Manchester accent. I'm listening to a woman in her 70s, you know, than to listen
yeah,
to a guy like my age, and you know that would be better, you know, with maybe a similar voice in a way, you know. That's what they do
yeah,
actually. There's even a profession called a dialect coach, you know. So when they work with an actor, they do that. They sit with the actor and they find people who are kind of similar to this actor, you know, because that's a better entry point than, you know, just go, if you when you just go general, you know, like I just
mhm,
like general Manchester or whatever, you know.
yeah,
So being specific, and having a real source, like realistic source, like from life, you know. And then the first thing you do is before you do the accent is listening. It's like if it's a very particular type of listening, you know, because if you cannot hear, you can't reproduce, you know. So first you really have to hear precisely what the difference is and what exactly the change is from the way you speak at the moment, you know. So like it's almost like you have to design a map of this accent for you because it's
Yeah.
different for everybody. You know, like for me, it's a different map. If I, for example, do the London accent or something, for me, it's a different map than somebody who is from Texas. You know,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
I think it was what's her name, Renee Zellweger. I think she did a pretty good job in Bridget Jones'
Bridget
Diary. Bridget
Jones.
Jones.
Yeah, she did a
Yeah.
very, very good job in Bridget Jones, and it's not always the case with American actors.
Yeah, I think she is from Texas. Actually, that's why I just remember
Oh, really?
this example. So
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so you find your archetype and sort of map out the difference between the way you speak English and the way they do it. And
mhm.
then, does it get more technical than that? Do you start to like identify specific sounds or specific sort of spellings and relating to,
Sure, sure,
different
absolutely.
sounds and things?
I mean, that
Yeah.
if you have your map, then you work on each specific point on that map, like vowels, for example, what the vowel differences, and then you try to get that vowel, for example, as close to that original as possible. You know, I mean, or
Yeah.
the consonants or something. Of course, I mean, it can go fast, it can go slow. I mean, it depends. Some accents can come super easily, you know, like I've been to India many times. So if I start talking like with, you know, it's easier for me to get the music because I've heard it so much, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
and I've communicated with people of my age, for example. But having said that, Indian accents are also different, you know, like if you're in Delhi, it's one accent, you know, if you're somewhere in South India, I can kind of identify from those accents that I know in India, let's say, I wouldn't know this guy sounds like he's from Delhi, you know, but that guy, I'm not sure. Like, I haven't heard that one, you know, it's just a different accent, you know.
Mm.
You hear it's Indian, you know, but you don't really know where it's from, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and then you have this map, and then it's just like with sport and or martial arts, you start working on each particular sound, let's say, and then you try to combine them. Yeah, then you try to create a flow because in the end, you have to have the flow. Like any native speaker has a flow. We don't communicate like saying sounds. We create a flow. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and also the rhythm. I mean, the big thing here is the rhythm. Every language has a different rhythm. You know, like you live in Paris in France, French has a different rhythm than English. You know,
Yeah.
in French, it's a pretty. I mean, they split. They have this like two. I think two types. They discuss two types. Like one is I think syllable stressed language, and the other one is syllable timed and stress timed, something like this.
Yeah.
You know, I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but I can even without even knowing the definition, I hear clearly. Like in English, that's why when French people speak English, there's always like the same rhythm which repeats. You know, I want to talk to you. Today I am pretty busy. You know, like I mean, of course, different stresses, but it's pretty much the same kind of rhythm. You know, like
Yeah.
I never studied English in school. You know, like it's something like this.
Bah,
But in English,
of
it doesn't work
course,
like
and
this.
we speak like this, and this is how
Yes,
we
yes,
speak, and this like
yes.
that. So and also so the rhythm, but also the intonation, and they're tied
Yes.
together. So, for example, I will say a sentence like, could you give me some tips for learning languages? Could you give me some tips for learning languages? You know, we have these quite complex intonation patterns. But
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of French learners, because they don't have a stress-timed language, because that's
Mm-hmm.
not their background, it's much harder for them to identify when we're going up and how we go up, down, up, and these different intonation patterns and things like that. So so identifying these, the rhythm, the flow of a language or an accent. Yeah.
Yeah, I can give you another example, which is super obvious, like with German, for example. In German, you have, let's say two types of verbs. One type is stressed on the first syllable,
Mm-hmm.
and the other type is stressed on the second or third. You know, it's very important because all those verbs were just stressed on the first syllable. You have to split them when you use them in a sentence. You know, so the stress has to be extremely clear. You know, like ich muss dich anrufen. It has to be on anrufen. If you say ich muss dich anrufen, you're saying something else. They don't get it, you know,
Right.
because that's not the verb. So you have to be very clear if the stress is on the first syllable or on the second or the third, you know?
It's actually true. It's true in English as well that
Yeah.
I've heard that word stress is actually more important for being clear than, for example, a vowel sound. Because if you think about it, in English, there are so many different accents, and a lot of them are about the way we pronounce vowels, certain
Hmm.
vowels, or the way we pronounce certain consonants. But often the thing that will make you understood is whether you're stressing the right syllable in the word. So, the story I always tell is my wife in England, she's French, trying to order a banana in a shop, and she said a banana,
Hmm.
and the woman in the shop had no idea what she was talking about, and she's like, "There are bananas right there," and my wife's like, "Can I have a banana?" Because in
Yeah,
French it's banan,
yeah, yeah.
banan, and so she's like, "Can I have a banana?" And the woman was like, "What? Sorry, darling, I can't understand what you're saying." And I was like, "It's banana, banana. Can I have a banana?" Or she wants a banana. Oh, a banana. Just getting that syllable right is so important. So it's the same in English.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Syllable stress, like word stress, syllable stress, like I can tell you, like for people whose native language, let's say, is Russian, to them, the way British people talk is almost like music. I mean, there's too much intonation. Germans in the way as well, because
Yeah.
if you hear like real Russian accent, uh, there is not so much intonation. It's very pretty much. It's like very similar intonation. It's almost pretty. There's no like this the kind of like
Oh, hello.
variety.
How are
Yeah,
you?
no,
Oh, that's so
because
nice. Yeah,
it's not in their mentality. They don't communicate like that.
but
So
that's
that's why
on the
they
on the
don't.
on the flip side, someone who speaks like that for us seems like so kind of cold. It
Exactly,
seems it seems
exactly,
pretty cold. That's why I
exactly.
guess like Russians can be cast as baddies in movies. I mean, it's not just that. It's not just linguistic reasons, of course. There's all sorts of other stuff going on. Um, but yeah, that's very interesting. The way that these different sort of language systems affect the way that we see each other and stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
I think like if you want to learn an accent or you want to improve your pronunciation and you know which direction you want to go, in a way, it's good to understand how those people actually express themselves. Because it adds. It's part of that. They speak that way for particular reasons because they are like that. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
they
yeah,
just
yeah.
are like that.
And then going back to the multimodal thing again, which this just shows that it's important not just to reduce language down to the bare bones of grammar and vocabulary, but to understand that there's this whole other vital thing, which is this delivery system of pronunciation and understanding the importance of getting the rhythm, the intonation right, so that you're you are able to sort of express yourself in the way that people will understand you. Um, what about things like shadowing? Do you do that? Do you kind of like listen to someone and repeat what they're saying while they're saying it at the same time, or do you do like specific listen
Yeah.
and repeat exercises?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I do. I can't do that for a particular accent or a particular scene. But I think I also do it subconsciously, just like in daily life when I hear somebody. In my head, I kind of almost repeat it, or maybe I can do it quietly, not to bother people. I do it because I want to hear like, okay, what kind of rhythm was that? Like you hear somebody. I do that all the time, subconsciously as well. I think, but consciously for a role I can, if I have identified a person who speaks with that accent, for example, that I need, I would do that. I would not start practicing the lines actually, because this is actually something similar to this language, as I said, like first the intermediate level, then advanced level, then improvisation. So what
Mm,
you want to do when you learn pronunciation is you don't just want to learn how to pronounce those words that you're going to say like in the scene, because even if you do them correct, if you do pronounce them correctly, there will still some kind of freedom missing. You will still almost feel like you see sometimes in some acting, in some roles, it's like everything is correct, but just something feels like he's not exactly real, if you know
hmm
what I mean. I've
hmm
seen some good, even some good actors play a character whose accent is super different from them, like playing a Russian or something. It actually happens quite often with Russians. It's like, yeah, it's not bad, but it just doesn't feel he's real. You know, so
Yeah.
I generally don't start with the scene, don't start with the text that I have to say. I just start listening to the guy and trying to try this, try that, copy this, and try to. So when I actually start feeling that, I think I'm catching the rhythm. I think I'm catching his intonation. Even
Mm.
within one language. This is a really good topic. Even within one language, if you play a particular, this is interesting when you play a real person. When you play a real person, because every person has, even if it's like, let's say, all Americans, but like Steve Jobs had his own very particular way of stressing things. So if I would play him, I would really listen to him a lot. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
like last year,
yeah.
I did. I said about this show. It was in India, but I played a French guy. He's a real guy. He's actually a serial killer. I mean, the show should come up. Charles Sobrage. There is a show on him on Netflix called The Serpent. I don't know if you've seen it.
I
It's
haven't seen it.
French, came out maybe 2-3 years ago.
Okay,
So it's played by a real French guy, so he just works with his accent, But to me, it was good because this man actually he came out of prison in 2022, and after that, he gave like 2 or 3 big interviews on French TV, on British TV. They also called him the Bikini Killer,
the
because
Bikini Killer.
Bikini Killer, yeah, because he killed people like in the 70s, and most of them were like hippies, and there was all funny kind of situation for that time.
Right.
So yes, I did have to listen to that a lot, to get his particular French way of speaking, in English,
Because everyone has we talk about dialects, different ways that groups of people, speak a certain language, but then there's idiolect as well, which is like how individuals speak. And that's a very interesting thing, certainly for an actor or for a comedian. So, I do a bit of stand up and I try and occasionally do some impressions. I do that in my free time as well, just for fun. And I guess it's a similar process. So like if I'm trying to learn how to do Robert De Niro or how to do Christopher Walken or something, that you watch a lot of his, I'll just be like watching an interview with De Niro, and then you start to
Yeah,
kind of like so then I was kind of thinking, well, this is pretty interesting stuff,
exactly.
you kind of get this kind of certain kind of rhythm, and it's pretty interesting. That kind of following along, listening to someone and playing around a lot of the time. You just keep playing around until you get to a comfortable spot where you're able to comfortably inhabit that kind of thing. Do you ever spend time just like talking to yourself on your
Yeah, I
own?
can absolutely. I can do that. I mean, if I'm preparing a character, I do that all the time. I mean,
Mm.
like I do. It depends what the kind of character, because also you have to know like what kind of, yeah, like if it's a kind of guy who definitely will speak to himself, or something, I would do that for sure. Like you try to do things that the person would do in his
Yeah.
life. For myself, yes, of course, I would try to repeat the pronunciation like 500 times, like of some word. I would do that until I feel okay, that's close. It has to be at the point where you don't have to think about it. But what you actually said, like to inhibit, to become that is, I think, important. There's a good example, not from writing, but not from acting, but from writing. Ray Bradbury. He was asked to do a script for Moby Dick.
Oh yeah.
So, and he hadn't read the book. Is that like,
Oh, okay.
I want you. The producer told him like, I want you to do that. Let's talk tomorrow. So I hadn't read the book. Like, here's the book. So you have a night to read the book.
Just a
So
huge book.
he started reading. He read maybe 300, 350 pages. He came and said it's crazy, but he wanted to do it. So then they moved him to London. He came to London. He lived in London like for 3 or 4 months. I don't know, just to focus on the script. So I mean, he had to change because you cannot shoot the whole thing. You have to cut it and modify it. And he said it was not working, and then not working. But at some point, like when he kind of started, he got the feeling of Melville in his work. He said, one day I just woke up, I looked at the mirror and said, "You are Herbert Melville," and then it went.
Yeah, it's interesting, inhabiting the thing, and that thing of like talking to yourself. I think is a really important way of practicing. And if we go back to like learning English and my listeners, that I always encourage people to talk to themselves in English, and I think it's a good thing. It doesn't mean that you're mad or anything. It's totally fine. It's totally normal to just be wandering around your house and just sort of be muttering away to yourself in that language, because it's all about familiarizing yourself and attempting to inhabit this other dimension, this other paradigm, which involves all those rhythms and almost like a different way of thinking. It's kind of like you're just training your brain to operate in this different rhythm.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
I agree. I actually look at when people also ask me about like all this multilingual thing. I say I don't translate in my mind. I mean, if I have mastered the language, I don't translate. I just like when I speak this language, it's almost like like in the car, the first gear, second gear. So I switch gears. It's like I switch gear, and with accents, it's similar. You just switch gears, ideally. So
Mm.
you've switched it, and that's it. You're just in that stream. And you keep going with that.
Yeah, I think for some people, there's a certain unnaturalness and inauthenticity in that, or something like that. People feel a little bit reluctant to sort of make that switch, because
Hmm.
let's say if I'm trying to speak French,
Hmm.
and I can be speaking French as myself with this heavy English accent, because there's a switch that I have to make. Maybe it's easier for you as an actor or just you as a person, but there is a certain weird feeling where I kind of like, okay, I'm going to start speaking French as a French person now. Then it feels weird. I feel self-conscious. Making that switch can be quite a difficult thing for a lot of people to do, where they're like,
Hmm.
okay, so I'm going to speak English, but I'm going to drop the accent. I'm going to actually do it as an English person does. Some, people can feel a bit funny about that. But for you as an actor, that's just totally normal and natural,
That's
isn't it?
natural, yeah. But I think if it's easier if you live in the country. Like if you live in Paris, you see French people all the time. It's already part of your daily kind of mind stream, let's say, like
Mm.
an experience. So I think this switch is slightly easier for those who are there, who are in that language zone or that accent zone, and you've had all these experiences with this lady who sells baguette, and you've seen these people, you have these images in your mind, they're real.
Mm.
So I think it's a bit easier because I mean, even if you're not an actor, other people influence us somehow. Daily experience, they shape us.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
because you have these experiences inside of you, then it's kind of easier, I think, if you're there, if you're
Yeah.
there.
Mindset as well as part of it, that you've got to sort of be open to accommodate to other people, and that's often about sort of letting go of something, kind of being open to other people. The thing that happens with me though, when I speak French, when I make that switch and try to speak like a French person, it comes off like a terrible kind of what's the word for it, caricature. It's
Hmm.
like my friends are like, "What? That's how French people speak for you?" I'm like, "Well, I'm just trying to sound like a French person. I just sound like I'm making fun of French people. It's like a
I
terrible
don't think it's
impression."
actually bad. I think even in any acting work or language work, this can be like a good first step to overdo
Yeah.
it, to make a caricature. I don't think it's a problem because you can always bring things down. Like you start with the caricature, let's say, but at least you got the general direction right. Like
Mm.
at least you have been able to get away from your natural direction. Like if you're a Brit, then that's your. So at least you've been able to get away from that. So now you're here. It's a caricature, we know. But if you consciously know that I'm still in the zone of character, that's great. Then you keep moving, and at some point you start dropping this aspect of caricature, and it just starts becoming more natural and natural. Now you do it. You do it in acting as well. Sometimes if a scene doesn't work, even some directors would say, "Okay, let's overdo it. Let's overact it. Like this. Let's do
Yeah.
something something unreal. But at least you'll get the direct. You'll get some energy, which is right. And then just bring it down. That's okay.
That's that step by step thing you were talking about. And also, again, it makes me think of my English lessons, because often when I'm trying to encourage my learners to repeat after me, get the sentence stress right, get the intonation right, I will say, right, let's exaggerate this so much, and I'll say, let's read out this text like we are a really typical presenter on the BBC.
Hmm.
And you end up doing that kind of presenter voice. And if we can exaggerate it so much that it's ridiculous, then you push them there, and then you kind of shoving them in the right direction, sort of thing.
It's
Yeah.
also a method. Why not? Why not? So I don't see any issues with that. Whatever
Mm,
works. My
mm,
approach is whatever works. But philosophically, I would say, like, every time I move from one place to another, I try to not to bring my past into that place. Like, it's just this place works like this. Like,
mm,
if you're in Germany, this is how they communicate. If you are in UK, this is how they communicate. I think many people have issues with that. Like for example. To most Eastern Europeans, people in the UK would seem to be, in a way, fake, or in a way too chatty, because they're so polite. They would say things that, like, even maybe they might not mean that, but they just say it because it's a matter of politeness. Like, oh, you have such a nice dress. Like, people don't say that
yeah,
in Eastern Europe. Because it's like, if you don't think it, you don't say it. To them, like, why should you be so, like, I've heard that from there's many Polish people in London. So I've heard that, like, oh, they're all so fake.
yeah,
But I
yeah.
don't
Of
I don't
course,
see
yeah,
that as fake. I see it's just like, that's how people communicate there. So it's
yeah,
like, you have
yeah,
to understand, you have to adapt to that if you want to function in that environment. But then you go
yeah,
to Warsaw, you change.
yeah.
you know.
I've heard that as well, of course, that English people can come across as sort of insincere, or there's something
hmm
fake in that kind of like, "Hi, how are you? So nice to see you. Oh, okay, okay,
Yeah.
bye." I remember, Polish friends in London sort of saying, "Why do English people always do this? Bye," at the end of a conversation. I'm like, "Well, what do you do?" We say, "Well, thank you, bye, goodbye, click." And that
Yeah.
sounds so unfriendly. So it just sort of like goes both ways. But yeah, that's an interesting thing. You've got to kind of like just decide, okay, that's just the way it's done, and that's how I'm going to do it. Which kind of makes me think of that what you said earlier about feeling like you're a citizen of the world, that you're kind of fairly what's the word, untethered. You're not
hmm
like firmly attached to one
hmm
thing, so that allows you to move perhaps more easily between these different modes of communication. That's very interesting. Um,
Absolutely. And you learn faster that way.
yes, yeah,
'Cause you're more open.
but it is an identity issue. It's a difficult transition to make, and people. A lot of us, we hold on to our identities quite strongly. Like I do as a English guy living in France. I still feel
hmm
very much like an English guy. In fact, even more maybe. Sort of
hmm
coming here, I'd suddenly became even more English by just
That's
by
interesting.
by contrast. And I don't think it helps me learn French. Um,
hmm
but I think it's a thing that many people experience, just this sort of like there are obstacles or things that hold you back in terms of
hmm
letting yourself go and letting yourself become like an English speaker, let's say, which includes so many things, so many cultural, psychological things. um, so you talked about martial arts, which is interesting. What kind of martial arts do you practice?
Well, my basic style is kung fu. That's how I started. But along the line, on the way, I kind of like have learned from here and there. I always take things from, like, what I like in this style. I take. I mean, I have base. My base, as I said, kung fu. But if you have a base, then it's really easy to incorporate something from other styles. Because the principles are all the same. Because it's the same body, which is
Yeah,
also related to language. Like, it's the same body, whether it's martial arts or it's language learning. It's one body. So I think if you know how it functions, if you know how to find the balance, if you know where the power comes from, then you can quickly again adapt if you need to learn a new style. If you like, within, again, film environment, if you work like, there's some kind of stunt situation or fighting choreography situation, most of the time, if you work with guys with a fighting coordinator, he's not his style is not your style. Like, his basic
yeah,
style. Usually the guys are from karate, or many stunt guys are from taekwondo, actually. This taekwondo is more about high jumps and
yeah.
legs, because legs look better on camera than
Yeah, there's a lot
hands,
of
right?
action. Taekwondo is always so impressive. A lot of high kicks and just sort
Exactly.
of, yeah,
Exactly.
it's really, really powerful stuff.
Exactly. So, but I mean, you work with this guy, okay. But if you have your base, then you can quickly understand how he wants you to work for that scene, because it's not about you so much; it's about the scene. So it has to work. On Matrix, for example, the old Matrix film, 1999. They actually worked
Mm.
with the team from Hong Kong. That's
Really?
why the action looks so good in that. It doesn't look typical Hollywood of that time, because it
Yeah.
was Hong Kong, like it was the best team from Hong Kong doing those martial arts sequences.
That was one of the great things about The Matrix. It was one of those first crossover films where, yeah, they managed to take the action from Hong Kong style
Hmm.
action movies, which were way ahead in terms of fight scenes and fight choreography. The Hong Kong movies were just like so far ahead, and the way that the action scenes were directed. Like you look at Jackie Chan's great films like Police Story or something, the way the
Hmm.
fight scenes are done, it's just so different to fight scenes you see in Hollywood movies where you can't see what's
Absolutely.
going on. You've got no idea really what's happening. But there are all these little techniques that Hong Kong directors would use. Like I saw a video documentary about it. For example, a punch lands and then you actually see it from a wide shot, like the punch or
Hmm.
kick landing. You actually see it striking, and then they instantly go to a close-up shot of that fist connecting or the foot connecting. So you end
Yeah.
up with like a kind of almost like a double hit. It really emphasizes the
Yeah.
impact. All these little tricks, but also a lot of it's just done on wide shot. But I suppose you can do that when you've got actors who've got these incredible kung fu and gymnastic skills. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, cinema. Actually, that's a good thing that we're speaking about this, because cinema is also a language.
Mm.
It is a language. So it has all those components that we've spoken about. Like it has rhythm, like what you're describing is rhythm. Like how do you
Yeah.
use rhythm? How do you use emphasis? How do you use contrast? You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's all there. It's all there. Like cinema from this perspective is probably the newest language that we have. Like it's just like 100 years old, a little bit
Oh
more.
yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
different because
Absolutely.
theater is different. Theater is very old. Theater is language based, like the way we know it. Language. But cinema is
Mm.
its own language. You know,
Mm.
yeah. I mean, those guys are the best. Those guys are the best for sure. And Jackie Chan in particular, it's. I think to him, he approaches this a little bit like a ballet, like a dance. He understands rhythm very, very well. But also, he is inspired by old Hollywood as well, because you see some of his stuff like from the 70s, from the 80s, from the 90s. A lot of it, there are many sequences that look a little bit like Harold Lloyd, for example, like
Yeah.
physical comedy.
Directly influenced by him, like the scene where he's hanging off the clock,
Oh, actually,
um,
yes. Actually, yes.
which is a
Yes.
direct reference to Harold Lloyd hanging off a clock and some other stunts like that. Yeah, really good. So, do you have what are you working on at the moment? Have you got anything coming up, or is there
Well, no,
anything that we can see? What can we
well, as
see
I
you
said,
in fact?
well, you can see me. There's a couple of shows. There'll be the Indian show. I know it will be available on Sony Indian. I mean, it's called Sony Live, but I think you can watch it also online. Should be soon. It's called The Summer of '76.
Hmm.
Because it's about this 70s in India, in what's called the emergency. They had that period, very kind of almost revolutionary period. Um, there will be next year. There will be a show called Ponies. I have a role there. It's American.
Hmm.
Yeah. So these two, that would be the closest. That would be closest, I would say.
Okay, cool. All right. Look, it's really, really interesting to talk to you, Ivan. Thank you for sharing all of your insights and your experiences and things. It's been fascinating. Very nice to meet you.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for this opportunity, because I think it's a great podcast. Lots
Thanks.
of good stuff for people who want to learn English effectively. So I think it's great that you're doing that. So thank you.
So there you go. That was my conversation with Ivan. And thank you again to him for taking part in this episode and for freely sharing his experiences and his advice, and for being genuine about trying to share his sincere thoughts and advice about, how he's learned English and sort of how he deals with things like accents in his work as an actor, and how you can do the same thing. I appreciate that, and I really enjoyed meeting Ivan. He was a really down to earth, chatty person, a great guest, like the ideal guest for this podcast, really. Now, I said earlier that I would list some takeaways, some things you can take away from this episode, conclusions about learning English, practical advice that we can take from Ivan's example, from his life, from his experiences. And so I'm going to do that now. I'm going to do it as quickly as possible because I don't want the episode to get very long. But this is going to be a condensed set of tips, let's say, for learning English taken directly from this episode. And you can find all of this listed on the PDF, right, within the transcript. So if you just keep going through the transcript, you get all the stuff with me and Ivan, and then at the end you'll see all this stuff listed there again. So you can go back to that and refer to it anytime you want to. So first of all, this is the first of 11 points I have here to share with you. So the first thing is the importance of learning through doing, not just studying. Use English for real things. Do things in English. Ivan's English really improved when he started making projects in English, doing the web series, doing acting work, talking to people, and not just sort of studying in an academic way, or especially studying grammar. Now, we all know this, of course, that you don't learn a language just by studying the rules of grammar. Everybody knows this now. But still, it's worth remembering the importance of trying to do things in English. Make English the tool, not the subject. Start a small project, maybe a vlog, a diary, an Instagram account, a podcast, movie scene reenactments, some sort of little drama group or something, anything that requires using English. Try to do some sort of project in English, even if it's just writing a diary every day, which I have recommended on the podcast before, or maybe even an audio diary where you speak into a recording device about your day. You could just record for a few minutes every day. Doing something in English makes a huge difference. Use English as a tool, and through this method, you'll directly work on your English skills. The theory helps. Your grammar book certainly helps, but it's not the engine that drives your English. Real communication is the thing that you should always be trying to practice. Second point, multimodal learning. So this means using a variety of different modes of communication in your learning. Just basically, don't forget the importance of all these other aspects, that language is not just words on a paper. It's a whole variety of other things. So don't reduce English to just rules or even just sort of an abstract thing like maths, stuff on a piece of paper. But it's a whole series of interconnected methods of communication. So I'm talking about body language, pronunciation, tone of voice, facial expressions, rhythm, the general context. It's not just words on a page, right? So try to incorporate a variety of different forms of practice and different contexts in your English practice. Okay. Watch people when they communicate with each other. If you watch something in English, consider the whole culture of the way that they communicate, the way they look at each other, the way they pause, what their hands and face are doing when they say something important. All of it, it's all part of the same thing. And this is what, Ivan did when he was learning with the Mormons, or when he was learning on set. He was constantly noticing the bigger picture. And combine skills, listen and read and speak and move, repeat a line while copying the actor's body language and facial expression. Try to completely inhabit the English that you're trying to learn. Third thing, listening and repetition. Re-listen on purpose. Listen to something more than once. Again, I've said this before, but it's still worth saying again. Repetition. You listen to a podcast episode, for example, listen to one of my conversations, you'll get a certain amount from listening to it the first time. You'll pick up certain things, but listening to something a second time, even a third time, you go much deeper, and it actually consolidates the things you noticed the first time, and then you notice even more, and you're able to notice deeper things, not just more language, but other nuances and things. So you could maybe listen to something once for general meaning, listen again, and then you could take a more active role and note down unknown words or phrases and check them out, and then listen a third time in order to notice those items in context. This is the sort of thing I help you do in my premium lessons, of course, when I do vocabulary reviews. But repeat listening, re-listen. Notice repeat offenders. I mean, notice items of vocab that come up regularly. If a word or a chunk, like a phrase, keeps appearing, it is a sign you probably need it. You should put it on a list. You should start using it yourself. And be aware that sometimes it's hard to notice the words when you're listening. It's hard to notice new words that you don't know because they can be a bit indistinct. So be on the lookout for those invisible bits that you can take on yourself. Vocabulary lists. Ivan did this for the language of filmmaking. You can make lists of relevant vocab. It can help you to kind of actively learn language, but beware of just doing just translations. Beware of that. Just writing the word in English and the translation. I've done an episode before, how to learn English vocabulary and not just stare at word lists. That episode was full of that kind of advice. Basically, write more than just a translation or a definition. Try to include an example sentence or some other little details to help you remember a word when you write it down in a vocab list. But doing that can definitely help. Fourth thing, on this point about whether Ivan is just a particularly talented person, if he's just like gifted, he suggested that actually it was about discipline as much as talent. He said that you don't need to be gifted at languages. Ivan's message was clear. People think he's special, but in reality, discipline, hard work, and repetition are what may have done most of the work for him. Be stubborn. Basically, don't give up. Right? Let something bother you in a good way. If you don't understand something, if you can't do something, don't give up. Just be stubborn about it and persevere until you feel like you have got it under control. Small, realistic goals, step by step, small goals, one step at a time. Try not, how do you eat an elephant? You eat it one spoon at a time. How do you climb a mountain? You do it one step at a time. It's the same thing with English. So you set small, realistic, achievable goals and you deal with them one by one. For example, I want to be able to have a 10-minute small talk conversation. I want to understand one specific podcast episode without subtitles. I want to be able to tell this particular story about my life in English. In step 5 here, or point 5 is relating to point 4. It's about step-by-step progression. Ivan's levels were quite a good model, really. Basic conversation, just being able to talk about everyday things. Then more advanced conversation, being able to express opinions, stories, feelings, and more nuance. And then a third level, which is the ability to be spontaneous and to improvise, being able to react in real time with no preparation. Identifying these different stages and trying to deal with them one by one rather than trying to jump to the end. Just deal with things one by one, break things down into achievable chunks. Number 6, accents, rhythm, and sounding natural. First, learn to hear an accent. You can't produce what you can't hear. Choose one accent that you're targeting. It could be a kind of standard British accent, standard general American accent, whatever it is you want, and really listen to it. Really start to identify the different sounds. Map it out. Create an accent map. Notice which vowels in speaking English, which vowel sounds are different to yours. How do they stress certain words? What's the rhythm? You could find your accent twin. So that's, let's say, a speaker of English that is very similar to you. Someone of similar age, probably the same gender, someone whose voice feels close to your natural voice, and then use them as your model. I will let you decide who that is. I mean, it would help if you could find someone who has plenty of audio content that you could work with. Rhythm and word stress are arguably more important than perfect vowel sounds. For example, the case of making sure that you're saying banana and not banana. And, that's just one example of many multi-syllable words. So don't underestimate the importance of word stress and sentence stress. Shadowing works. That means repeating along with a speaker or pausing and repeating after them, trying to match their timing, stress, and melody. Ivan talked about dialect coaches. I did actually speak to a dialect coach on this podcast once upon a time. Jerome Butler is his name, and Jerome works with actors in America, working in television and films. Which episode was that? I'm thinking it was 682. But I'm not sure. I need to check. In which episode did I talk to Jerome Butler? Accent coach, dialect coach, 691. I wasn't too far off. You could listen to episode 691 and see what Jerome Butler has to say about helping actors learn certain accents. And he talked about shadowing and the importance of using shadowing as one of his training methods. So it works. Try it. Exaggeration. This is point 7. When you are trying to copy someone's accent, exaggeration is good. It's a good way to push yourself in the right direction. So overdo it first and then calm it down. So exaggerate the British or American accent or intonation you're trying to copy. Really push the stress and melody to an extreme point and then slowly bring it back to something natural. This is not fake. This is a question of training. Just like with acting, you push beyond your comfort zone and then you can refine it, or you push yourself into the right area and then you can refine it step by step. Point 8, identity culture and letting yourself change. I've heard people talk about the fact that maybe the main reason why people don't improve their pronunciation is because there are subtle psychological factors and identity issues which actually block you and stop you from being able to speak in a more, let's say, British sounding accent because you feel self-conscious or something like that. But there is something to be said for just kind of letting yourself go and feeling free to borrow a new identity. It might feel weird. It might feel like you are not being yourself, but that flexibility is all part of your language learning journey. Adapting is not the same as betraying your culture. You can still be 100% you and also learn to play by local rules when you're speaking English. Point number 9, talk to yourself. Talk to yourself a lot. Self-talk is powerful. It doesn't mean you're crazy. Walk around your flat narrating what you're doing in English, or you could rehearse future conversations, retell a story that you heard, argue with yourself about something, or at least after you've been trying to work on a particular accent, trying to copy a particular person, you can go around and try and inhabit that character. I have done it myself just for fun or just for comedy when learning to do impressions of Paul McCartney or something. I'll just sort of like walk around as Paul McCartney, just walking around. That's a lovely little mug you got there. That's great, I mean, that's a silly example, but it is a technique that you can try and do just for fun. Walk around talking to yourself in a different character. And it's also good as a way of immersing yourself in English and a way to make yourself think in English as well. The goal is to stop translating. It's to find your flow state in English. Like Ivan said, it's like changing gears into a car. Once you're in English gear, you just stay in that gear and you just drive. But you've got to practice shifting into that gear, which is why it can be fun just to play around with English, walk around and pretend that you're me doing an episode of my podcast. And that can be very good for you. Point number 10 is treat English like a role you inhabit. So this is where you have to think like an actor, step into the role of an English speaking version of you, use your voice, but with English rhythm and intonation, add the body language, facial expressions that match. That includes little filler words, little filler sounds. All of it's part of the package. Use emotion. Try to express emotions when you practice English. So you're not just trying to express a grammar rule or trying to express correct English. You are actually trying to express real feelings and put some emotion into your English as well, because it should come out with a certain kind of intonation. So don't just say words, feel what you say, which is where you have to be like a Jedi, right? You don't just use English, you have to feel the English. And this actually really helps you to remember language and also sound more authentic. And then point number 11 is simply inspiration and the fact that you can do this. Various messages which are implied by Ivan's story are that you can start with school English that isn't great. Like most people in the world come out of school with a form with English which isn't amazing. I mean, it's all right, but most people come out of school with a certain sort of intermediate level of English, which isn't great. You can start with that and you can build from there and end up working internationally. You don't need a perfect method. You need consistent action, curiosity, the courage to interact, discipline, and a sense of fun as well. And being from somewhere else is not a weakness. It can be your superpower, a different perspective, a richer identity, and something that you can share with others. It's always great fun to explore and share your own personal worldview from your particular corner of the world. So there you go. There are just 11 points which we've taken from this episode that you could apply and think about and reflect on and use yourself in the future when you continue to improve your English. Thank you again to Ivan. Thank you to you for listening to this podcast episode all the way up until this point. Check out the PDF transcript. That could be useful for you. And otherwise, I look forward to reading your comments. Do you have any comments? Do you have any insights that you can share? What did you take away from this? Anything at all? I'd love to read your comments and get the conversation started in the comments section. Other things I could say, obviously check out Luke's English Podcast Premium if you're really serious about using my podcast to help you learn English, teacherluke.co.uk/premium. And if you're a fan of my podcast and you want to show your appreciation, one thing you could do is to write a nice review. So if you listen to this podcast, for example, in Apple Podcasts, then leave a review for the show and let other people know that you love the show and that it has really helped you. And tell people sincerely what it is that you like about this podcast. It would make a huge difference to me because those reviews and ratings on different podcast platforms really help to promote my podcast. And this is something I have to keep doing because even though I've been doing this for over 16 years, this podcast has been going for more than 16 years, I still have to make sure my podcast is still getting kind of promoted by these algorithms and things like that. So if you leave a nice, positive, sincere review on your podcast platform, that can definitely help. Okay, that's it for this episode. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Speak to you again soon. But for now, it's time to say goodbye. Bye. Bye. Bye.